Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. Now right off the bat, I'd like to warn you that this video could be quite long because I've got quite a lot to say about this Policar BRM P160, and I'd also like to acknowledge Harry Wise from Homeracingworld and Dave Kennedy from Slot Car News. Both of those creators have done good videos on this car, and I put the links below. And I have watched their videos before I placed my order for this car, so I knew what I was getting into right from the start. Now the other thing I'd like to warn you about is because this video is quite long, I'm not terribly good at talking to camera. I have to edit it quite a lot because I spout a lot of nonsense and it just sounds ridiculous when I end up watching it back. So I have to put little captions in there to correct me and all the rest of it. I'd rather be on my bench with the tools in my hand than here presenting to a camera. I find it quite difficult. But because I got quite a lot to say, I'm going to actually slow down a little bit and correct myself as I go along, rather than having to say this over and over and over again and edit it all and make it look vaguely coherent. So I apologise at the beginning if I get my words all wrong and I end up going in a direction I have to pull myself back, because there's just going to be too much stuff for me to cover to have to keep on editing it. So with that said, I'd like to tell you that Harry did a really good video about the way that he changed the wire on this car, because it has a problem with the two front wires touching the front axle as they go down to the guide. And then Dave followed that up with his version of the same procedure to keep the wires off of that front axle. Now when I saw those two videos, I realized that there were a few other options as well that I'd seen that I thought that I could show the world as well. So that's what I want to expand on with my car, is other ways to get those wires past that front axle that I believe will work. And the other thing that Harry did was he actually created some pod float. Now that's another thing that I'd like to do on my car, is to create the same amount of pod float that Harry did, and then just see if I can go a little bit deeper and get a little bit more pod float. I don't know, I've not been into this car that much. I have been in it a bit, which I will tell you about in a second, but I think there's possibly more float to get. I don't know. Harry might be right. With what he got, that might be it. But I want to try and get a bit more if I can. And also, I did try and make this car have a decent lap before I started this video, so I could give you a flat out the box time, because I've heard a lot about these Policar Formula 1 cars, of how brilliant they are. And I must say, from what I've seen from this car, I think that's right, but only after you do a certain amount of work to it. Now, you don't need skilled work to make this car work, and I may have just got a bad one. So everything that I'm going to show you and tell you about in this video is all well within the realms of normal slot car maintenance and a little bit of slot car upgrading, but it does need to be done. At least to my car it needs to be done. But there's not many videos on YouTube all about this car, so I think that this video would be quite a good one, as I think this is going to be a third video about this car, because Harry and Dave have done theirs and I couldn't find anything else on YouTube about this particular car other than a couple of rotating videos which doesn't tell you anything and so on. So I think this video will be a really good add-on to the two videos, or three videos in fact, that have gone before it with Dave and with Harry. So trying to get a fast lap with this car, it turned into a disaster. Now when I first got this car, you saw from the unboxing, I absolutely loved it, and I still do. Absolutely fantastic. I took it out the box when you saw me take it out the box, and I had to stop talking because it just looks so good, and that was amazing. And then the other day when I tried to put this on the track to give you a first run time so that when I do my upgrades we can compare it, and I wasn't expecting much of a difference because these cars are already supposed to be pretty damn quick. Now another point of reference, Dave Kennedy suggests that his car was a little bit on the slow side. I didn't find that with mine, because in my mail call video I did suggest that I had a motor ready to go in it if I found it too slow. I didn't find it too slow, so I won't be dealing with that in this video. I personally found this car to be the right level of performance for my track Crow Valley, and I only ran it at 80%, so that if I turned it up to 100%, it had way more power than I needed for my track. So me personally, it's fast enough. I don't feel the need to change the motor. So that parked. Anyway, I tried to get a good lap with it out the box. Now I took it out the box, undid the little clip, put it in my hand, and it went up a level again. It's like as soon as you get it in your hand, even, it goes up in status, in my opinion. It's got something about it. It's the size and the weight. It's beautifully put together. It's beautifully crafted as a model. It really is a very, very, very nice thing. It's really very, very nice. And I put it on the track, set my timer, and I started running some laps. And instantly, I knew it was a fast car. As I said before, 55 seconds on Crow Valley is okay. 50 is really, really good. Anything beyond 50 is really flying. And where all the competition cars are, they're sub 50-second cars. And I knew that this car, straight out the box, was a sub 50-second car. And I really wanted to get that impressive impact time straight off the bat. So I pushed. And I fell off the track a couple of times. My fault, pushing too hard. But I really wanted to get that impressive 48 or something like that, because it's definitely capable of it out of the box. And I got about 15 to 20 laps in and it stopped working. Now, I've been here before with my sideways cars. From new, the guide wires snap right where they meet the guide. They just snap off. The wires are a bit brittle and they snap. Bit annoying, but it's well within slot car reams of just changing that wire. It's no big deal. But with this car, it's a bit more difficult because you've got front suspension arms going onto the front of it. They're very, very tight to the body. In fact, they go over the body, and you've got to kind of pry them away and let them flex. So it's quite not tricky, but you've got to be careful. You don't want to be taking the body on and off too many times, because every time you do it, you're asking for problems. So that was a little bit annoying, and I had to try and work out how to get into the car just to try and lay down an initial out-the-box lap. I didn't really want to do it because it's not really an out-the-box lap anymore if you've got to get off a very fragile body or a very tricky body and get in there and fix it. Then once you're in the car, the wires that they put inside the car are so short, you can't actually have any excess wire. So if you snap the wire at one end or whatever, you've actually got to replace the whole wire. And I didn't want to do that either, because I want to save that for later on in the video when I address all the problems that my car has or has got. So that was a problem. So what they do is they cut off a piece of the sheathing off the wire, they twist it and then solder it or tin it. And then at that point where the wire comes out, the main unsleeved or the main sleeved cable, they bend it down 90 degrees. So it comes along as insulated wire, and then it's soldered and then bent through, so you get that really tight 90-degree bend. And then that vertical is put into the guide and fastened in some way or another. I didn't quite pay attention to that. It just goes into the braid some way. Whether there's a grub screw in there or whether it's in an actual ferrule, I'm not sure yet. I can't remember. But it goes into the, and it bends. And because as it goes over the top of the axle, the wires come round, and it's such a short run, and then they solder it and then bend it. You've got a real tight spot at that bend. And what happens when the guide moves back and forth, because the cable can't flex much in itself, it pivots on that soldered bend and it snaps off. And this car snapped off within 15 or so laps, almost instantly, the same as my sideways ones did. With the difference with the sideways is you can just undo some body screws, take out the body, there's plenty of spare in there, bear a little bit more, put it in there, done. It's easy. This car's not like that. If you break the wires in this car, you've got to change the whole wire because there's nowhere for excess wire to be. So that was my first problem. It stopped working after 15 laps, and I'm like, ugh. That's a bit of a pity because I was hoping to do a good lap, but I was still on its good side at that point. So I thought, well, I'll mention it in this video and I'll repair the wire. So that's what I did. I ended up bearing back a little bit of the cable, tinning the end of that wire, and then soldering it to the top of that post that's basically just soldered wire as well. It's a bit nasty, it's a bit rubbish, but I thought, well, if it holds, I'll slow down a little bit, I'll get in a half decent lap, and we'll move from there. So I did it, put it all back together again, a little bit miffed, but whatever, it's slot cars. Put it on the track, set the timer, and off I went. 3 laps in, it stopped working again. Same problem. So what you do is you put it on the track, and sometimes you can move the car left and right to its lock to lock, and you can actually get the car to spin up again if the wires have snapped in such a way where they'll touch what's left of it. Sometimes you can get it to pulse, and I thought, well, I'd try it. Full power, put it on the track, twisted it. Yeah, that's right, it's working, it's pulsing. Right, okay, so the wire, either my wire's broken, which is highly likely because I didn't do a very good job on soldering it, or it's the other side. So I thought, well, now I'm annoyed. So I wasn't going to do a test run of the car. I thought, no, I'm going to walk away, I'm going to fail it, and then we'll go straight to sorting it all out. And I was a bit miffed with that. I thought, no, this is a brilliant car. The performance is definitely there, and I really would like to put down a fast opening lap straight out the box. So I begrudgingly went back into the car and I repaired the other wire, and sure enough, the other wire had snapped. So within less than 20 laps, both wires had snapped off the front guide, which is absolutely fine in the slot car world. That's not a problem. But when you've got a brand new car, you would expect it to do more than 20 laps before it fails completely. And you should be able to get into a car yourself. It shouldn't be beyond the realms of any slot car enthusiast to be able to get into a car and sort out something as basic as that. But it's not good, is it? So I repaired the second wire, begrudgingly, put it back together again, and then put it back on the track and tried to go again. Reset the timer and off I went. And then I got a different problem. Now the front guide on this, as I'm going to show you later on, has always been incredibly stiff. And for some reason, this guide stiffened up. It got so bad that as I was going into the corner and coming out sideways, because it's such a short car, I can get really sideways and keep the gear and keep it locked in. It was actually holding that drift for 6 inches or maybe a foot down the straight because the guide had stiffened up so much it couldn't square itself up. So it's going into a corner, going down the track sideways, and then finally kicking in and then going. Now that's never going to produce a 50-second lap, sub 50-second lap, no matter how good this car is. That way of driving, that handling is never going to produce a decent time, and I definitely didn't want to go into the car a third time and then fix that problem, because that's a problem I want to fix later on in the video, and that would definitely mean this car has failed its out-of-the-box track test, which is a huge pity, and that's where I drew the line. I packed Crow Valley away. That takes an hour just to pack away the track, because it's a bit of a pain to get it out and put it back away, because all in parts, and where I set the track up, it's really tight, and it's not an easy thing to do. So I was a bit miffed that I had to pack away the track to come to this table now and talk to you here, having not been able to produce a decent time, because the car wouldn't let me within 20 laps of a brand new car. And that's really worth mentioning. This car is brilliant. There's loads of performance in this car, but you can't get it until you do work. Mine may be a one-off. I suspect not. It's a pity, but here we are. So I wanted to start this video, this very long, waffly video, about the problems that I've had with this car and why I can't give you an out-the-box time. Now, I did glance down at my timer one time when I was putting some laps together, and I saw a 53.5 second lap, so 53.5, something like that, which is not bad. I mean, I've got some Racer Sideways cars that are blinding cars, and they've done 53 seconds straight out the box. To put it into perspective, my fastest car that I've got so far around Crow Valley is my NSR Porsche 997, and that's done Crow Valley in 46.5 seconds. Most of my rally race cars are doing Crow Valley in somewhere between high 27s and high 28s. There's about a second between them all. So that's roughly where you are. And I would predict this car out the box would do probably around, from what I could feel, probably around 49, around about that, maybe even a really high 48. It is that good. There's definitely that potential in there. But I couldn't extract the potential because it failed 3 times and I couldn't do it. So like I say, 53.5 seconds at the time I saw on the scoreboard before I had to stop doing it. So with that said, I've been in this car now twice. I've now got a much better understanding of what problems I've got with this car, and I will list that now on the table. There's quite a long list of things that I need to do to this car, and I urge you to bear with me, because when I go through that list manually and actually correct all those things, again, it's all within normal slot car parameters. There's nothing that I'm going to do that I need to go to the lathe for or anything like that. It's just basic work that needs to just fettle this car in just to get it to its full potential. So it's worth sticking with this video, and it's worth watching Harry's video and Dave's video and get what they've said about it as well, because Harry goes into wheels and with tyres as well. He goes a little bit further again, and it's well worth watching. I think there's 2 videos on Harry's, so watch those, watch Dave's as well, and then watch this video as well in conjunction and get a really good idea, because between these videos now you can get one of these cars with confidence. Watch these videos and you can make a really, really good car out of this. Now, I know that this car is going to be an absolute blinder when I've finished. So that's why the thumbnail says, because there is a in this car, and I want to help you extract it, because not all of us go to clubs and not all of us race this car at club level, and I know they do. They race these cars at club level and they're blindingly fast, and obviously the racers out there will know how to tune all these cars and they'll be very familiar with what I'm going to bring up in this video. But not everybody goes to clubs. A lot of people use these cars at home, and they would be very grateful for a video like this to back up Harry's and Dave's. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get you on my bench. I'm going to go through the shopping list of problems that I've got with this car, and then I'm going to go to my workbench, and then we'll go through them all one by one, and we'll fix all the problems in this car, and then we put it back on Crow Valley when it's working properly, and I'm going to show you, I'm pretty sure, a hell of a lap from such a small little car. So hold on, here we go. It's going to be a long one. So let's get you on my bench and let's get fixing this car. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. For those of you unfamiliar with this car, the first thing you'll notice is a bewildering number of screws. You've got dome heads and countersinks, and also a small brass one in the back. Well, basically, dome head screws hold in this motor pod, and the slot head screw at the back there just holds the body to the back of this pod, and then these countersinks here actually hold the body to the chassis. So to get the body off, you need to undo these 4 countersink screws and take out that brass slot head there. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So there we are. So you'll notice that there is actually brass washers underneath the bottoms of all of these screws. Now they may or may not fall out, so just be aware that they may or may not be where you think they are when you finish taking the body off. So the next problem that you need to be aware of are these front suspension arms here and here actually go up inside that gap right up in there, and hopefully you'll be able to see this. This body just here is curved, and these arms disappear into a recess right in this corner right here. So when you take the body off, these arms are going to flex slightly and you need to pull it up through. Also to be aware of, in the bottoms of these holes you've got 2 posts here and here. They may or may not snag in the body, causing extra resistance. So you need to try and bring up that body past those stiff poles, suspension things there, and also past these suspension arms here. Now as you heard, it went a bit of a crunch. It's just everything moving past each other, but as I said earlier on, it's very, very tight here, so just be careful of that. And then all you do to get the back out is you lift it up and you slide it out of that pocket in the back there. You don't bring it up, you bring it out towards the forwards of the car. And there we are, there's your body. So that's that. So now we can actually see the front suspension arms. You can actually see there's a little tiny spigot on the end of each arm, which technically locates these arms into the pockets that sit in here and in here. Now as you can see, there's a little bit of body that oversteps that hole. You can see my knife is disappearing into it there. So when these suspension arms are fully home, you don't see the back part of the last sort of 2 mil of that suspension arm. So to make your life easier going forwards, and this is entirely up to you, you might want to think about cutting at least half of these 2 little spigots here that's sticking out beyond the arm, just so that if you have to take the body off in the future, it comes off nice and easily. Now talking about taking the body off in the future, you've got to make sure as well that these 2 posts here are nice and free, because I've noticed on mine there's a slight bump on one of them which just causes a little bit of resistance. You can actually see even that I've got paint scraped down the side of mine. It's just a little bit tight in those holes, and the diameter of those posts is actually about 3.7 when it comes down to it. So I'm reading about 3. Let's go with 3.6. So if I take a 3.6 mil drill, which is here, this is 3.6 mil. Let me just show you on camera. There we are. Well, actually, that one's actually, yeah, it's, yeah, well, let's go one size up just to prove the point. So here we are, it's a 3.7 allegedly. So, yeah, 3.66, there we are. So that post goes in that hole there. And you see, that is a nice that is a nice fit in that hole. However, if you've got any lumps or bumps of paint or anything on these posts here, it just snags. So when you take the body off, it can just hang up. So just make sure that these are nice and smooth and they fit cleanly into these holes here. And so you might want to think about trimming those little pieces there if you intend to remove the body. Otherwise you might run the risk of snapping these arms at some point. So that's a point of note to get the body off. So the next thing to note is this brass screw on the back actually has a small shoulder on it. So that will allow you to have a little bit of body float on a clean shank. The other thing to note is that these countersink screws that hold the body on also have a very, very small clean shank. So again, these screws would in theory allow a little bit of body float. Not that I think it's worth having body float on this car, you want pod float. And the shoulders are exactly the same. Let me just remove one of these here for you just to show you. These pod screws are exactly the same. They have a little tiny bit of shank there which will allow you to have a little bit of pod float when you're ready. And again, they've still got the washers in the bottoms of the holes. So I'm going to remove these washers now just to play it safe. Actually, I'm not going to remove them because all of these are actually in there pretty firm. When I took this apart before, one of them, I think these two fell out, but these ones are firm. So just check that, you don't want to lose them. Okay, so moving on to the wire. I'll leave that one there actually, I'll need that one in a minute. So moving on to the wire. This is 26 gauge silicone wire. Now it is 1.5 mil on the outside of the rubber outside sheathing, whatever, and it is about 0.5 of a mil on the actual wire. Now this is tinned to make it easier to measure, so it's a little bit tricky. So the solder is actually giving me a bit of extra thickness, but it's saying 0.55 there. So you know it's basically 0.5 of a mil, bearing in mind I've tinned this, but for the purposes of this video that's perfectly good enough. Now 26 gauge wire is actually capable of 3.5 amps, so there's plenty of power capacity in this wire for this car. And also if we measure the outside of this wire, you also get 1.5 mil. And also when you measure the actual wire down, let's go in there tight, well how about here, well that's saying it's 0.7 down there, but it's soldered up on that post. I believe this is also 26 gauge wire. It's quite difficult. There we are, look, 0.5. So it basically is 26 gauge wire. And even if it isn't, even if it's a bigger capacity wire, this 26 gauge wire is still capable of 3.5 amps. That's way more than this car needs, so this is still perfectly good. And as you can see, it basically is exactly the same stuff. So you want to get yourself some of this wire, because as you can see, as I said before, there's just not enough wire here. Once you snap your wire up the front here, you can see there's literally nothing left to replace it with. Now if you look on the underside of this body, there's plenty of room down the sides here. Well, you might want to put a little bit of lead in that, but anyway, for the purposes of this video, there's actually plenty of room there to get excess wire. So if you wanted to add a little loop here in readiness for cutting fresh wire on the ends there, you could actually have a little bit in reserve down the side or put a little bit in the middle. That would be doable. So let me show you the guide and the problems we have with the guide. Now first thing you'll notice is how short and uneven those braids are. So it would do you no real harm to replace both of these braids with longer braids. This one could be doing with about 3 mil longer, and this one could almost be being 5 mil longer in my opinion, but that's not why we're here. So this is a metal ruler, and I won't even bother with my paintbrush, because watch this. This is how stiff. So if I keep that there nice and straight and I just move it that way, I'm keeping the back end as straight as I can. Look how, oh sorry, you can't even see it in the camera there. Hang on. Right, so here's the ruler, here's the car. I'll try and keep the back end nice and straight. And look at the curvature on this steel rule. You can actually see, and look how little that guide is actually moving. Look at that. That is absolutely unbelievable how much, and that guide has hardly moved. It's barely moved 10 degrees. Look at the angle of that ruler. I mean, that is absolutely outrageous. Look at the state of that. It's just ridiculous how stiff this guide is. And let's do it the other way. There we are. There it goes. Look at the angle on that. In fact, the guide hasn't even moved. And look at the angle on that metal ruler. Look at this. There. Finally, it went. But that's incredible. I wonder if the car will actually even... If I hold it like that with the guide all the way over and I start to turn the chassis, look at that. It's actually there. It went finally after took me 45 degrees before the weight of the chassis took over the friction of that guide. Here we go. There we are. 90 degrees right there. There's 90 degrees there. That car is holding its whole weight on the stiffness of that guide. So if I just touch it, see, it's still not even wanting to fall there. Now, you might say, oh, Rob, it's because that nut is far too tight. Well, let's see if that's the case, shall we? Let's remove that nut completely and then see what happens with my steel rule. Now I've removed the nut entirely. There we are, look. No change. It's still unbelievably stiff. If we turn it all the way over to there, and then we turn the car, it's freed up a little. Let's push it back to where it was supposed to be. There you go. So the guide is now fully home and it's turned there, and we can actually probably just go straight from there, straight for 90 degrees without any trouble. And even when you push it, it's still reluctant to fall until it comes completely slack. So there's the problem with the guide and why it was going around the corner like that and then locking up and having to go down a straight at a silly angle. Okay, so next is the problem that Harry was showing about the clicking inside the wheel after he'd sorted out his wires. And the reason why he found his wheels were clicking is because of this little digit cast into the back of the wheel just here. In my case, it actually says 1, but in his case, it was number 2. So that is ever so slightly proud inside the wheel. Just, I can feel it. I can feel it there. You can just see the screwdrivers catching on it. So that's a problem as well. That needs to go. Now Harry just put a 10 thou spacer on there, and that will certainly work. I want to do something slightly different. I want to get a little scalpel in there and scrape off that number 1, and then paint the back of the wheel silver. Although maybe I won't, maybe I'll put I don't know, let's see how it goes. But also, there's not a lot of wheel stub on there pointing out beyond the suspension. And I'm wondering whether I could just shave some of this assembly back, just a little tiny bit, so that I can get more wheel engagement, because that, well, it's difficult to say because you can hear it, listen. You can actually hear it scraping. Now I've pushed that on quite tight and it's made the wheel a little bit tighter than it ought to be, although it's hard to say because the wires are still there. But that's a problem that needs to be addressed. So the big problem that everybody's been experiencing, or at least the problem that Harry and Dave were experiencing, was this wire here. It's going right underneath that axle and making that incredibly stiff. Now the problem with that is as you go into a corner and the car tips over, it's going to touch on that tyre and effectively put the brakes on. Now, if you know yourself, if you drive, if you put the brakes on in a bend, you stand a good chance of skidding. So as you go into a bend and you lock up your front wheel or give your front wheel resistance, it can actually make the car go sideways. So they make the car much more back-endy than it needs to be. So that front axle being that stiff is no good. So the way that I'm going to try and overcome that is... Let me just take these wires off. Actually, no, let's not do that. Let me show you what's actually fitting on the front of those braids. Okay, so as you can see, I've botched the tops of those braids, or tops of those wires onto that braid, just to try and nurse it through my disastrous test run. Now I can't actually see what's going on underneath those wires, but I had to do that because there's no spare. So I'm going to chop these off and I'm going to see what's actually holding these wires on. I don't actually know. I didn't spot it when I was doing the soldering, so let's just have a look and see what we've got underneath these braids. What I'll do, in fact, is I'll take the guide off completely, and then see what I mean about the washers? They like to run away, so just be careful of that. So let's take this off now completely, and we'll see what's actually holding these braids on. I don't actually know. Let me get my glasses and see if I can pull them out. Right, I've spotted it. What you've got is 2 grub screws. There's one in here and there's one in the other side. So if I just take those out, back those off, there we are. So now we all know it's just a pair of grub screws. Right, and there we are. So that's that. So like I say, they need changing for slightly longer ones. And as a matter of interest, let's measure what that is. Right, they're basically 4.5 half mil, 0.5 mil braids. Now actually, I've just suddenly remembered I need to put these back because I want to show you another problem with this car that I need to overcome, and for that I need the braids back in it. So let me just put these braids back in, and then I will show you the problem with this car, another problem with this car, in a moment. Okay, so this is the other problem I wanted to show you, and that's how far off the ground this front guide is. Now that's pushed all the way into the chassis, and if I put the car on the setup block and I move the car back and forth, you can see those front wheels aren't turning. Now if I actually rub the belly of the car on the chassis plate, you can just about see those front wheels turning, but you can see how much deflection I'm having to put on that chassis just to get those front tyres to turn. So if I relax the chassis back, you'll see that there's all that gap underneath there. Now I don't know if that will show on camera very well, but there we are. I'm moving it back and forth, and hopefully you can see that there's actually, I don't know if you can, but let me see now. Here's a 0.5 mil drill. Oh, here we are. Right. Yeah, I guess it's catching 0.5, so it's probably less than 0.5, but it's really high off the ground. There we are. Look, you can see there. So you can actually see how much those wheels are missing the ground, and the same on the other side. There, you can actually put in quite a lot of pressure on that chassis there. But there, you can see there, look. That's a lot of distance that those wheels are missing the ground by, which isn't quite right. So we need to think about changing these braids as a starting point. Now, as I said to you before, these braids are 0.5 mil thick. There they are. And what I've got here is what they call racing braid, and this is only 0.2 mil thick, which is there. So that's 0.3 mil thick, or thinner, sorry, than the original braids. Plus, we may be able to move this guide up a little tiny bit by shaving away some plastic on the underside. That's something that we'll get to when we get to the bench. So basically, this guide sits too far down. We need to bring it up using braid and also possibly a little bit of trimming. Now also, in Harry's video, he actually removed these ears completely from his pod. Now that may well be something that I end up doing for this car. There was that washer that I said escaped from the pod. So again, be careful of these washers, they like to run away. That one's come away as well. So what you'll find is this pod has little moulding lines around the bottom there, and they tend to stick there. And if you can see that, there we are. Right, watch this. See, it's holding as I'm trying to separate. It's holding, and then it eventually pops out. That was probably making it freer now. So there, you can see now that's not just, that's gripping there. So what's happening is you've got a flash line that's running just around the top of this hole here, possibly in there, and the two are plugging together and forming a bond until they come apart. So if you want to leave these ears on this chassis, you'll need to just trim the bit of flash that's caught in here so that those two there can separate like that as intended. Otherwise they'll be continuously gripping and you won't get the movement that you're after. But like I said, Harry actually chopped his off completely because he didn't think that it particularly needed it, and I'm inclined to agree because you've got two screws here holding the front of the pod on. I don't quite understand why you need two. Again, he left this screw out, which is again a good idea. But also what you could do is you could chop this bar off here right at this point, remove this whole front section and give you more room up front to get your wires through. And we'll come to the wires right now. So let me just strip this front end down and we'll get to the elephant in the room, which is these wires here. Just before I do that, you can also see that there's actually a reasonable amount of free spin on that axle when we remove the resistance of the wire. So that's not too bad. You've also got two adjusting screws down here and here to adjust the actual axle, but as Harry said in his video again, you've got nothing to bring the axle down up the top, so really they're of very little use, but they are there. So perhaps, you know, there's, well, anyway, they're of little use. So let's strip it down and let's get these wires sorted out. Okay, right, so there's the front end all stripped down and the bit that we really want to talk about. So here is our 3.7mm drill that matches the body post height. Now the way that Harry did his clearance for his wires, there's two pieces of plastic across here. There's an upper piece and a lower piece. He glued the upper piece and the lower piece together and then just chopped away this top piece so that he created a well across the top there. Now you can do that, but the trouble with that idea is you've still got this axle in the way of the wire. So although you're creating a little bit of space, it's not really going to get you really where you need to be with the motor wires completely clear of that axle. It does give you a little bit of allowance, but I'm not sure it's giving you as much as you really want. I think that Dave had the right idea when he tried to come through underneath. And what Dave tried to do is come through here like that to get to his guide. Now I think that was probably the right approach because you've got plenty of room down here clearing the axle. Now the problem that Dave had is that when his body post comes down, you can't get the body post past that wire. Now here's the thing, there is this piece of plastic here, which I don't think is going to really come through on camera, is a piece of flat plastic. Now you've got two options now, because if you remember I told you that 26 gauge wire is only 0.5 of a mil thick when you strip away the covering. So this is a 0.5 mil drill and this is a 3.7 mil post. So if you put the post in there to simulate the body post and you get this drill, you can actually get this drill in through there past the body post there. Hang on, I don't think my fingers are in the way, aren't they? Right, there you go. You can actually see that that is plenty of room to get your wire at 0.5 mil through that gap. No problems at all, without any trimming or doing anything at all. All you would need to do to get your wire through there is take your silicone wire and just bare very, very gently, very, very gently, just bear it through like that. Take off that silicone wire, take off the silicone coating rather, and then pull it. And there you have it. You can give it a little bit of a twist. And now you've got a 0.5mm thinning section where that can go through there. It can go through there. And then your body post will go straight down. No problems at all. And you can see that is free to move. So you've got plenty of clearance and you can get your wire through. And then when you put your axle through the car, hey presto, you've got plenty of movement, plenty of clearance. And I think that might be the end of part 1. Now there's still quite a long way to go with this car, so there'll be a part 2 that's just as long, if not longer. So in part 2, we'll finish all the diagnosis, we'll do all the work, and we'll take it to the track, and we'll see just how good this Policar BRM P160 really is. So, if you've enjoyed this sort of content, maybe you'll subscribe, and if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.